Okay, so this video is specifically going to be about Whiplash, which is the specialist writing area. But obviously, if you're doing any film, the techniques I sort of talk about for the specialist writing will go over quite nicely. Now, our centre has done particularly well in specialist writing over the years. Over the last 5 years that we've had film studies, consistently we've averaged about 13 out of 15. So I know that this method is tried, true, and tested. Okay. Now, on question 5, specialist writing, there is an element of being able to predict what the question is involved in this, right? I am not saying that you can predict exactly the wording of the question. However, the crux of the questions, the general gist of it, is pretty much going to be the same every single year. I would advise against preparing one answer because obviously it's difficult to adapt one specific answer depending on what they're asking you, and they may see your answer as sort of not quite what they're looking for. Most of the time, they are going to be asking you to agree, disagree, be challenged by, address something that you learned that's new, or something along those lines from the specialist writing, comparing it to the film that you've watched that the specialist writing is related to. Now, some centres like to do the cinematography specialist writing. So they do the generic specialist writing that could be applied to any of the films. I fundamentally disagree with that. I don't think it's a good move at all because obviously I think the use of, say, the cinematography specialist writing is quite difficult to get to grips with and then address towards the film that you're looking at. It's much better to engage with a more interesting area, I would argue. And for Whiplash, I feel like the specialist writing is incredibly interesting. So what the question is asking you to essentially do is look at the specialist writing, form your opinions on the specialist writing, and then talk about it almost like a comparison with the film itself, which means everything that you say about the specialist writing, you need to be able to back it up in some way or back up what they're saying in the specialist writing with what you've observed in the film. So in a very straightforward way, I'm going to go through a few different areas for Whiplash and sort of talk a bit about how you link it to the film. So first of all, you do not have to quote the specialist writing. You don't have to quote it at all. You can make generic responses from it. So if you know the basic idea of what they're looking for in the specialist writing, you can just give an overview of it, okay? At the start of every single question 5, you must lay out exactly what specialist writing you're looking at. And for my groups, I tell them to memorize the title. So in this case, it's Whiplash, Men and Masculinity. And what you must do is give an overview of what they're saying in the specialist writing. So for ours, for example, it talks about this idea of the alpha male and how Fletcher portrays this idea of being an alpha male through the use of costume and so on, and how Chazelle has tried to make this character seem like this alpha male, but also how they neglect significant amounts of female influence in the film and mostly focus on a male-centric story. Okay? So what I teach mine to do is pick quotes out, and again, you do not have to reference these quotes. Pick quotes out in order to begin their comparisons to the film. So number one, in the specialist writing, it says that Neiman needs to be validated, okay? And how we link that to the film is that Andrew is constantly looking towards Fletcher in the film, and we follow his eye line with sort of eye line shots. So we can see what he is consistently looking at, which is always Fletcher. And if you want a scene to link to that, you would link it to the first practice because his eyes are sort of full of Fletcher. He cannot stop looking over for approval. So obviously the specialist writing is validated in that scene. Number two, there's a quote there that says recognized alpha male, okay? In terms of that, it links to Fletcher's aggressive mannerisms, his black outfit, and his costume, which are also mentioned in the specialist writing. He's meant to display and cut this figure of a masculine man, especially with how aggressive he is, okay? 3, his first real female connection is a distraction, and that's definitely the case in the film. The breakup scene and the lack of representation of Nicole is addressed in the specialist writing, and also in wider context was addressed at the Oscars that year because so few women were nominated. Okay. Number 4, Andrew is a baby-faced youngster who seems unkempt. That is definitely proven in the film because Andrew's costume changes over the entire film. He starts off dressing mostly like his father, And then he starts to dress to emulate Fletcher to show that transition from being a younger man to trying to impress a more alpha-centric male. And then finally, number 5, it says they're out alpha each other. There's a clear indicator of that in the end of the film when they're fighting for control. The roles are reversed. Neiman takes that control by playing the drums without Fletcher's approval until Fletcher comes around and takes back that control again with his fist. He's got an action where he shows off his bicep and puts his fist out, okay? So all of those things link together to allow you to explore and analyze the 15-mark question. You should do the same with your own specialist writings for your own films, but obviously for my class, we're focusing on Whiplash. I hope this has been useful to see how I would go about it, and thanks for watching.